We are talking today about something that is probably very personal, all right? I'm going to give you a warning up front. This is going to sting, all right? It's going to hurt a little. And I'm not saying this as you are going to be the only one hurting. It stings me. I'm very much in the boat here. Have you ever noticed how most medicine today is geared specifically towards symptoms? You ever notice that? That you don't take medicine to fix your problems usually. You can. There are some out there that do, but most medicines are designed for symptoms, right? If you go to get cough and cold medicine, it can't kill the cough, right? We know that, it can't kill the cold. The cold is a virus that we don't have a cure for. Even Tamiflu, if you go and take it, it seems like it still has to run its course for some weird, crazy reason. But it helps with the symptoms, right? If you have a headache, what does Advil do? It doesn't actually stop the blood vessels or whatever that's popping in your brain. It just makes the pain go away, right? Which is a symptom of something. That's what we are a society built on dealing with symptoms rather than dealing with problems. And the same is true of the Jews. That is exactly what the scribes and Pharisees had been doing. So when you hear Jesus say this stuff, a lot of times we just read over it and it's like, oh yeah, those scribes. Man, they needed a wake-up call, those scribes, those Pharisees. They needed somebody to jerk their chain. And we just kind of keep moving. But this is actually going to be kind of painful to hear. So I'm with you. I feel it. Because we're going to talk about hypocrisy. Oh, I know. The H word. Here we go. So what Jesus is going to do now is he's going to deal with the problem of the heart. So we've dealt with the problem of the teaching, and now he's going to get into a deeper rooted issue and not just deal with the symptom, but he's going to go right to the heart of the matter, and it is the hypocrisy of the scribes and Pharisees. And so we're going to universally translate this into our lives as we go through it. So let's look. Look at verse 1. Jesus starts, as he keeps teaching, as Matthew kind of puts his sermon together, he says, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before men to be noticed by them. Otherwise, you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven." What is that? What is the idea of practicing your righteousness before men so that you may be noticed? Well, it's called hypocrisy. Okay, now, we're not talking about just doing good things. We're not talking about just being good people. We're talking about doing something for the point of being recognized as being something we're not. So he gives us, what Jesus is going to do is he's going to look at the religiosity, and did Bill Maher coin that term? I don't know. He's going to look at the religiosity of the Jews, and we're going to apply that to us. We're going to see 3 different specific things that Matthew puts together, and I want you to see what he's going to talk about. The aspects of the religious nature of the Jews is not comprehensive. This is just, he's pulling out illustrations. And so I don't want us to focus on each individual thing as a specific topic, but more as a contextual whole of what Jesus is going for. Okay? And then we'll kind of look at how it applies to us. So look at verse 2. He's going to give us problem number 1. This is the first problem we see. The first problem is that specifically the Jews were making giving, the aspect of giving to the poor, they were making it about them. So we can translate this. Do we do this? Problem number 1, make giving about us. All right, so look at the text. Look at verse 2. So when you give to the poor, Jesus is saying, now this isn't the temple tax. This isn't the payments to the priests and the payments for the festivals that the Jews gave on a regular basis that Jesus at one point got in trouble for. Remember, they caught a fish, pulled it out, and had the 2 drachmas and he gave for the temple tax. That's not what we're talking about. This is the giving to the poor. This is, people would be in the streets. They'd be in the temple. The needy, the poor would be begging alms from the rich. And so what he says, when you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that you may be honored by men. Truly I say they have their reward in full. So let me give you something real quick. I highlighted some phrases here because I want you to see them. He repeats them over and over in this text. The first one, he says, as the hypocrites, that they may be honored by men. This is the point. This is the idea of hypocrisy. He says, don't do this. Because what they're doing is they're giving for themselves. They're giving to the poor so that they can be seen. And I want you to recognize that this behavior trickled down into the society. The society, first century Mediterranean Jew was a very, very caste-like society. And everybody emulated what was done above them. So if the Sanhedrin did it, if the Pharisees or the scribes did it, it was very much must be a pious behavior that they would emulate. And so Jesus is telling them, don't act like those guys. And by the way, he's been saying this all through chapter 5 and he's continuing it in chapter 6. Don't act like them, because all they're trying to do is they're giving for themselves. So what's the point of giving to the poor? Is it for us? I don't know how many of you guys do this when you see a guy on the street corner. Do you stop and roll down your window? So there's different people have different rules for that, you know. Some people are real staunch against it. I don't give money to anybody who, you know, who's at the street begging for it because they're making $60,000, $70,000 a year. You ever heard that? I'm like, really? Maybe so, you know. Or people offload money to the poor. Some people only give food. Some people have carry baskets or gift cards and things in their car to give them. I've seen that. This is the idea we're talking about. Again, we're not talking about giving to the church necessarily, although I want us to talk about that a little. We're not talking about our tithes and offerings. We're talking about literally what we do in public for other people in need is the idea. And look at what he says. The solution to the problem is make giving about the Lord. Giving is not about you in this respect. When you're giving to the poor, it's not about you being honored by men. It's about the Lord. Look what he says. But when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. This is a phrase he's going to repeat several times. The idea is that your giving should come from a place that's not about you. It's not for you, and it's not to be honored. And you're not to be honored in the process. It's to bring God glory. It's to be done in secret so that God receives the glory and the honor for it. Make sense? Super simple, right? This is the context, but he's exposing a level of hypocrisy. Just a tip on this, because I know so many times this text is taught about giving to the church. I want you guys to hear this. Paul says in Corinthians chapter 9, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7, he says, now I say this, he who sows sparingly will reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must do just as he has purposed in his heart, not grudgingly or under compulsion, for the Lord loves a cheerful giver. So add that to the idea that our heart is to be bent towards what we feel convicted to do. This isn't a sermon on if you show up at the street corner and homeboy's there and he's got a sign and a Sharpie and he puts it up and you go, I don't give to people. Then guess what? Don't give to him. If your heart is bent and you feel like you need to help that guy, help that guy. You see what I'm saying? I like how Paul words that. Your heart needs to be engaged in the process. All right. Look at problem number 2. Let's keep on trucking. We make prayer about us. So we go from making giving, the Jews were making giving about themselves. We do the same thing. We make prayer about us. Look at this. He says, and when you pray, you are not to be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on the street corners, and that they may be seen by men. Again, the same phrase. Like the hypocrites, that they may be seen by men. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. So what's the solution? Look at what he says. This is a super text. I'm going to break it down a little bit differently, but I want you to see the beginning of it. Look at it. We make prayer about the Lord. So rather than being out there, and how many of you guys have ever felt this twinge that when you're in a group of Christians in a Bible study and everybody's praying, or you're sitting in a circle, you feel like now you've got to pray, and so you're like, before you're praying, you're trying to think through what are the good, cool things that'll make you sound super holy, and you're trying to think up all this great stuff. Raise your hand if you do that. I'm just kidding, don't raise your hand. We all do that, right? I'm a pastor. I'm in prayer. Trust me, I think through, I try to not repeat what other people have said so as to not make it sound like I wasn't paying attention sometimes when I wasn't, right? So I'm always like, what did he say? Oh, and I don't want to say that. And so we do this, right? Because we want to sound holy. We want to sound like we're with it. We don't just want to say, God is great, God is good. Because that makes us sound like an idiot, right, in public. Who is this guy? You see my point? We do this. Look at the solution to it. Make praying about God. It's super simple. Isn't it weird how Jesus just like cuts right to the quick? Prayer's about me. Giving's about me, not about you. Look what he says. But you, when you pray, go into your inner room. So he's not negating group prayer. He's not negating the church coming together and praying, but he's saying these guys would go and they would stand on the street corner and they would wail and they would blow trumpets and they would pray loudly in order for people to see them. Now, granted, I haven't seen you guys doing this. If I did, I'd probably tell you, cut it out, right? But he's saying this is you and God. You're invoking a connection to the relationship that you have with the Creator. It's supposed to be a special thing, right? So look what he says. He says, you go into your inner room, close your door, and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Again, that same phrase said again. But let me tell you this. Can I tell you how many times I have heard this quoted as a standard for not praying in public? A guy says to go pray in secret, so I don't pray in public. And I want you to know that praying in public is a very edifying thing for the body. It's very encouraging. I can't tell you how many times that I've been in a situation where I've had a burden or I've been hurting and I've sat with men to pray, and it has just been a very sweet emotional time for me to connect with those men and to connect with God. So I don't want you to see this as Jesus saying, if you pray in public, you're just wrong. That's not what he's saying. But he's focusing on the hypocrisy of trying to be seen. All right? And then he keeps going, he says, and when you pray, do not use meaningless repetition as the Gentiles do. The Gentiles would do chants. They would chant to their gods over and over and over again. The same phrases and the same mantras to get into a rhythm, to invoke some emotional connection to God. He says, don't just get into this repetitious chanting. For they suppose they will be heard for their many words. So do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you even ask it. So there's this aspect of the person and the character of God, that He is all-knowing. You're going to open your mouth and only say what He already knows you're going to say. So what's the point in chanting? What's the point in making yourself look good? He already knows it. And then he gives us a model. And what I want to do is I want us to walk through this little piece of text. This is the Lord's Prayer, as we call it. I want to walk us through the text. And then what I want us to do is I want us to break down the text just briefly. I don't want us to focus too heavily on this, but I want you to see how Jesus instructs them to pray. So if the solution is to don't make prayer about me, but make prayer about the Lord, this is a model that Jesus gives, and I think it's important for us to see it. He says in verse 9, then pray in this way, our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be your name. So I want you to see this is adoration, right? You ever do the ACTS? You know, how do you spell ACTS? A-C-T-S. Oh, how many fingers is that? Is there only 4 letters in ACTS, Muff? Okay. Adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication. You ever see that? You pray the ACTS prayer or whatever. We all have these different models of prayer sometimes that we learn to follow from when we were young. I've kind of created one here, and I'm pretty proud of it because I thought of it like 2 days ago, and I want to share it with you. It'll be on the screen for you to write down in your notes. But what I want to do is I want you to see how he does this. So go back to the text and look with me. Our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be thy name. This is praise. This is worship. It's the term adoration. It's us pointing our faces to God with love. Just loving God. Hallowed be your name. The next part of it is our humiliation. Look at what he says. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's us putting ourselves in a place of humility or humiliation, that we would rightly put the position of us and God together. So there's this start by recognizing Him as the Holy One and worship Him. Secondly, come to it with the aspect of righting the position, because most days we flip it. Most days we think we're the God of our own universe. So if you're going to go before God, don't go with an arrogance. Look at verse 11. He says, give us this day our daily bread. Here's your supplication. The idea of, if you don't know what supplication means, think of the word supply. You're asking to be supplied. Supplication, seeking God to intervene and help you out and help those out around you. So there's adoration, humiliation, supplication. Keep looking. Verse 12, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. This is vindication. God, use your great grace to forgive us, to vindicate us, to make us clean people. Look at the next one. And do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from evil. This is preservation. God, please preserve us as our leader. Don't let us fall into temptation. Deliver us. Preserve us. So the acronym is all humans should value prayer. That's, like every good boy does fine. All cows eat grass. Every human should value prayer, I think is what Jesus is saying here. Adoration. What's the next one? Humiliation. Supplication. Vindication. And preservation. It's hard to remember, I know. It's not a perfect system. I'm just a man, all right? But that's the idea. He's giving us this. He said, when you pray, pray like this. And here are some things that you should involve in your prayer. So rather than spend a lot of time on that, he's exposing once again that prayer is not necessarily about you as much as it's about me. That you don't go praying just to be seen so that you can receive glory, but do this in secret that your Father will honor you. Look at the next one. Problem number 3. We make fasting about us. Now, we don't live in a society that does a lot of fasting, unfortunately. But to the Jews, this was actually a part of their religiosity. It was a part of their religious culture, that they would fast specific times of the year. Kind of like what we see with the Muslims with Ramadan. That the Jews had a specific times that they would fast throughout the year. And the problem is that it was meant to be a way of them connecting once again to the Lord, lifting up their country, their culture, their people, their situations to God, honoring God through this mode of denying themselves. But here we sit, and the Jews, the Pharisees and Sadducees the scribes were doing it in public to be seen so that they would be seen as holy. Look at what he says, verse 16. Whenever you fast, do not put on a gloomy face as the hypocrites do, for they neglect their appearance so that they will be noticed by men. You seeing the point? The reason I'm lumping all of these together is because they're one contextual idea. We do religious things to be seen as holy in our world. This is what the Jews were doing, and I don't believe that we've changed a ton in this respect. And we'll get to those points in a second. Keep going. For they neglect their appearance to be noticed by men when they are fasting. Truly I say to you, they have received the reward in full. In other words, the Jews were fasting to be seen. Their fast was for themselves. It was not to put themselves in a position of recollection, or that they would deny themselves in such a way so that they could focus on the relationship with God. It was about them. So look at the response. Look at what Jesus tells them. The solution. Make it about the Lord. But you, when you fast, anoint your face, your head, wash your face. In other words, he's saying clean up. The idea of anointing your head was to actually, the Jews would put spices and things in their hair. It wasn't like they bathed, like me, I bathe like 3 times a day because I'm like a dirt-phobic. These guys didn't do that. And so he said, clean up, wash yourself, make yourself look presentable like you're going out. Like, I think about when I go on a date, I always take a bath before I go on a date. I do my hair. I put on a decent shirt, right? Because I pitted out, all right? Keep your arms tight, baby. Like a junior high dance, all right? Don't. Okay? The reason is because I want to look good for my wife, right? He's saying when you're fasting, who are you looking good for? What the Jews would do is they would rip their clothes, they would put on sackcloth, this burlap type, this real poor man's material, and they would pour ashes on themselves to show their humiliation before God. But the problem is it became a setup for them to once again be seen and honored by men as, oh man, look how holy that guy is. He looks bad. And he's rich. This must really, really be a holy dude. That's what he says. He says, anoint your head, wash your face, so that your fasting will not even be noticed by men, that no one knows what's going on. You ever know anybody to fast and you end up going to lunch with them and they're like, I can't eat today, I'm fasting. Like they wanted you to know that? Great, I'll have another plate of nachos. Right? I'll help you with your fast. I will make this pain unbearable. Right? That's what we ought to do. Look at what he says. He says, so that your fast will be noticed by men, but by your Father who is in secret. And he says the phrase, once again, he said it 3 times so far. He says, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. This is about God. It's not about you being honored by men. It's not about the scribes and Pharisees being honored by men. This begs a much deeper question. So if this is what was happening with the Jews, how is this seen in the church today? Would you agree or disagree that hypocrisy is an issue with the church universally in America today? Just say yes or no. Yes. I didn't hear a no. Okay. Yes, we would all probably agree with this. Do you know what it looks like? Do you know what forms it takes? Because it doesn't take fasting, trust me. We're not known for our religiosity and our hypocrisy in fasting. And believe it or not, we're not known for our religiosity, and that may not even be a word. I may need to take this out of the video, I don't know. We're not known for prayer us being this walking around the streets. Guess what? We're not known for that in the area of giving. So do you know why the world looks at us and sees hypocrisy? Because we all just said, yeah, we all recognize that it's an issue. Do you know why it's an issue? Do you know what it looks like in us? I want to show us. And this is where we're going to connect the dots of what Jesus was teaching the Pharisees and the scribes to what we can learn from the Pharisees and the scribes' actions. The first thing I think that we're seen as is we are seen as morally superior. Morally superior. In other words, we're gooder. And we think we're gooder. We think we have the market cornered on being good. Now, we just exposed the last several weeks that the righteousness that Jesus was talking about, that he was telling the Jews on the mountain that your righteousness has to exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, or you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. And in that, we were discussing the fact that he's not talking about being good, but he's talking about a holy status before God. Your righteousness is not something that you can attain through moral perfection. And then he goes through the law and exposes how we can't, right? So the idea here is that we think somehow as a church, because I know Jesus and because I have this great, incredible words of the Lord, that somehow I have become better. I'm going to use this phrase, better than anybody who doesn't know Jesus. And so therefore we see ourselves as morally superior. Let me ask you this, okay? And I'm going to get personal here. If this bothers you, I'm sorry, but let's just go there. Do you think you can engage a sinful culture, a sinful world, if the community that you're engaging thinks you think you're better than them? You can't, can you? Like, it's like obvious. Let me give you an illustration. If you come to me and you say, Chris, You got something on your face. I need to help you get that off your face. But you don't recognize that you have something on your face as well. How do you think I'm going to take this? I'm probably going to take it as a joke. Yeah, sure I do. You got something on your face, dude. No, Chris, really. You have something on your face. No, you got something on your face. And then when I see that you're serious, I'm like, oh, brother, you need to go look in the mirror. Seriously? You think look at yourself. Jesus is going to use this literal analogy here in a little bit. Okay? With the log in your eye. He's going to hit it later on too. You see my point? Let me go a little deeper. How do you think that the church can engage, let's say like the LGBT community? How can we engage the LGBT community if you think you're better than they are? You know that's partly the point is why the churches don't engage, is because we see ourselves as better than somebody else, like that's in that lifestyle or struggling or whatever. We see ourselves as better than. We don't see ourselves as sinners with them, right? And that's a hard thing. I mean, this is, again, I'm there. I feel you. And so the idea is, do you think they're going to listen if you and I think we're up here somehow? So you see how we're starting the gap? Okay, so how else is the church seen? We're seen as unreal. We create something here that is unreal or polished somehow. The idea being that, have you ever met a Christian that when they're around other Christians looks a certain way that is unreal? They say things, they use language that is unreal to the rest of the world. We have what we call Christianese. It's phrases, things we say around each other, but we won't say, and when we say them in public, everybody doesn't know what we're talking about. And it puts us into a place where we are seen as this unreal or just super polished thing. You know how we get that way? By the very next one. We see church as only a place for the virtuous and morally pure. Let me give you some verses on these real quick. Okay, let me go back and give you some verses. Paul talks about this idea of being morally superior in Galatians. He says this one thing, speaking to the church at Galatia, speaking to them about they came to know Jesus, but then they're trying to earn it through the law. And look what he says. This is the one thing I want you to find out, that I want to find out from you. Did you receive the Holy Spirit by works of the law or by hearing with faith? He says, are you so foolish, having begun by the Spirit, are you now being perfected by the flesh? It's the idea that we think that by just being good, somehow that moral superiority is really what God gets us into relationship with God and carries us in relationship with God. Or Jesus says this to the leadership of the Jews in Matthew 23, verse 25. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. Boy, he loved to pick on the scribes and Pharisees. He says, you hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and of the dish, but the inside is full of robbery and self-indulgence. It's this idea of you look unreal. You polish the outside, but the problem is it's not what's really going on. There's rot going on in the inside because you refuse to deal with your heart. Remember this is a heart issue. All right? And then the last one I said, we become a place of that is only for those who are virtuous. I can't tell you how many people won't come to church. I'm not kidding. This is a true statement. Won't enter the doors of this place here because they think Christians and church is only for people who get to a place of goodness. In other words, I have to clean myself up to show up. Because they look around, and to be honest, let's be honest, we don't confess our sin to one another like we should. We're not open and transparent about what's really going on in our lives often like we should. And therefore, we come and it's all high fives and knucks and hugs and hey, let me get you a coffee and how are you and what's going on this week? Oh, praise God. Hey, let's sing together. And it's this really, we're all these virtuous, moral people just enjoying the Lord. And to be honest, we want that, don't we? Because when we leave this place, it's cops getting shot. It's videos up and down Facebook of black guys getting killed by cops. And political diversity. So when we come here, it's just like, yeah, everything's good. We're good. That's what we want. But the problem is that I guarantee you, sitting in this room right now, there are people who are devastated by what's happening in our world right now. But we'll never know. You'll never know. Because we won't tell each other. And therefore we create this air of virtuous, almost like we're hovering off the ground, right? That's the church. That's me. I don't want you to know what's going on in my life, because when you find out, you're going to fire me. Because you're going to find out I'm just as rotten as you are. Right? Jesus says again in Matthew 23, verse 13, He says, "Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, because you shut off the kingdom of heaven." Stop. How many people are we talking about that won't even come into the church because of this? The scribes and Pharisees were doing the same thing. You shut off the kingdom of heaven from people, for you do not enter in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. In other words, people look at you and they want help. They want salvation. They realize this world is broken, and there's the ideas of other religions that help comes from within me can't be true. It can't be. And when people come to that realization, they're looking for something outside of themselves. And guess what? The church has been saying this for years. So they're getting ready to come to the church. They're getting ready to come to Jesus. And then they see the Christians and they're like, "Ah, snap. I got to be with them." And we shut the door of the kingdom by our behavior. Oh, that's me. I know I do that. So let's talk about this. Let's get off of that. Lord have mercy. Let's talk about this. How do we get into this mess? Sometimes it's good to really look at the physical aspects. And this isn't going to be in the Bible. I'm just going to use some demographic studies from the Barna Group to kind of justify my points. All right, so I'm just going to use common sense here. All right, how did we get into this mess? And the first thing that we have to see is that you and I exist in what is known as a lifestyle gap. There's a gap in how we live. I love statistics. You don't know why I love statistics? Because it's like, it just makes everything I say from this point on true, right? Can I tell you, let's look at this for a second. What I mean by lifestyle gap is this. There's a gap between what we say and what we do, how we live and what is seen, how Christians are portrayed. There's a gap in our lifestyle. So I'm going to read off some statistics, and I want you just to see these real quick. This is done by the Barna Research Group. This is done across the country over a large period of time. Born-again Christians were just as likely as other Americans to do these things. All right, so in other words, as they looked at different activity, they saw no difference in the statistics. Here's what it said. Born-again Christians are just as likely to visit pornographic websites as anybody else in America. Born-again Christians are just as likely to take something that didn't belong to them as anybody else in America. Consult a medium or a psychic as anybody else in America. Jesus ain't cutting it. Let's go to that guy on the corner, see what he's got to say, read my palm. Physically fight or abuse someone. Christians are just as likely as anybody else to do that. Consume alcohol to the point of being legally drunk. Gosh, that was a big deal in the 80s, wasn't it? Man, you weren't a Christian if you got drunk. Unbeknownst to the church looks just like the rest of the world. Use illegal drugs or non-prescription drugs. Or non-prescription illegal drugs. Tell someone something that is not true. In other words, lie to them. Retaliate on someone for something he or she did. God, say something mean about someone behind their back. I bet you, believe it or not, I bet you the church probably does that. We're worse in that area than the rest of the world, I would. Let me give you some statistics that'll show you kind of where we stand in relation to, is the church doing better? In other words, let me shine some light on you. Have sexually inappropriate behavior. 30% of born-again Christians versus 35% of other Americans. There's a 5% difference between us and anybody else. How about this? Use of profanity in public. Right, because we know using profanity at home and in private is totally cool. But in public, that's a different story, right? 26% of born-again Christians do this versus 38% of other Americans. So there's a 12% gap between us and them. Good job. Keep it up. Recycling trash. I don't know why they put this in here, but I thought it was really funny. Did you know that Christians do not recycle trash as well as other Americans? Check it out. Only 68% of born-again Christians recycle their trash versus 79% of other Americans. Come on, we can do better. How about this? Help the poor or the homeless. 53% of born-again Christians do this versus 45% of other Americans. I don't know if you recognize about those statistics, even at the end, but those statistics weren't like astronomical, were they? It was like 5%, 12%, 8% difference between us and anybody else. In areas that you would say, well, besides the whole trash recycling thing, in areas that you would say the church should be here, right, morally. But the problem is that there's a lifestyle gap here. We claim moral superiority, but when it's viewed from the outside and what's really happening, there is a gap between what we say and what we do. Here's the second thing that's gotten us into this mess, and it's the message. We've actually jacked up the message of the gospel. Can you believe it? Like the one thing, like it's our one thing, is Jesus dying on a cross, raising from the dead, ascending into heaven, so that you and I, if we trust in Him, might have our sins taken from us and His righteousness placed on us, and we've jacked that up. We've created a message of rules and regulations as opposed to a message of grace and relationship. How have we done that? So this is how it's got us into the mess. This gap that we have and the message. Now what I want to do is I'm going to say one last phrase, and then and if you look at your notes, you'll have little places to write in here. Feel free to put down whatever you want. But I want to give you one final phrase. How do we fix this? What do we got to do to fix this? And I believe it's that you and I have to redefine what it is that we want. You're like, how does that fix anything? Here's how it fixes it. You're only going to do what you want to do. You're only going to do what you desire to do. So again, let me say this. If I were to poll Christians, just you guys in this room, and I would say, what do you need more of in your spiritual life? I'm going to give you a few answers. I'm going to get things like, I wish I could have more consistent quiet time. I wish I could be more consistent with that. I wish I could get a handle on some sin. I wish I was more moral in certain areas of my life. This is one I've probably said 1,000 times because I'm the most undisciplined person on the planet. I wish I had more spiritual disciplines in my life. Right? These are things that Christians say because they're good things. There's not a single thing wrong with any of those things. But the problem is that those are actually, believe it or not, means. They're not the end. And this goes back to what we talked about in the beginning. As a society, we're people of symptoms rather than people of dealing with problems. We put Band-Aids on symptoms as opposed to dealing with actual broken bones and broken things. We go, okay, here's a pain here, so let's stop the pain as opposed to dealing with what's causing the pain. And as a church, is it wrong to want to have a more consistent quiet time? No. But guess what? I guarantee you if I were to ask you, what does that get you? What's the point of that quiet time? And I hope you're going to tell me a deeper love relationship with the Father. That I would be more in love with Him every day. Because guess what? That quiet time that we all so desperately wish we could do on a regular basis but can't, the only point of having it, the only point of being in the Word is if it enhances your relationship with God. What's the greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart. What's the point of being in this book if it doesn't make me in awe of my Creator God who sent His Son to die for my sin? See my point? And trust me, I want to have more consistent quiet times. But if it means that's all I get out of it, I should just quit. Becoming a more moral person. Do you realize that you can't become a more moral person? I'm not kidding. You can't become more moral until your heart breaks for your sin. Do you know that? Try it. Try just being better. It doesn't work. You have to change what you want. You have to not just desire to be good, and to be better, but you have to desire that God would show you the aspects of your life that are not in sync with Him, that you might, to the point of breaking your heart. You see this in the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah does this. Nehemiah finds out what's going on with his Jewish brothers, and what does he start doing? What does he start doing? He starts weeping. That's the first reaction he has when he hears about the persecution of his brothers. I can't tell you what my first reaction is when I hear about Christians in Syria who are being persecuted, or all over the globe or whatever. It's usually to click to the next article. You see my point? This is why the church is seen this way. Because we don't break for our own sin. Heart doesn't break for our own sin, let alone anybody else's. So you can't become moral and get a handle on sin until your heart breaks for it. And what else should we want? I would love to be more disciplined spiritually, but you want to know something? Even greater than that, even past that, I want to be an influence in this community for Christ. All of these spiritual disciplines that I pray for are great things, and they do empower me and move me down the road. But if those become the ends, not the means to the ends, then I've missed out. You see my point? So how do we fix this hypocrisy? You individually need to do a task. Okay? You need to leave this place today, and you need to go home and get by yourself, spend a little time with just you and God, and just kind of sit down and think about God, and think about your life, get a little piece of paper out, and write down what you want from God, and what you want this thing to look like. What should it be like? What should you desire? What should change in your heart? Because guess what? You're going to do what your heart wants to do, regardless of how bad you think otherwise. It's how it is. Make sense? That's the task for the church. If the church is going to fix the lifestyle gap, if we're going to fix the message of the gospel, it's got to come from us changing our heart's desire to be one that delights in our Creator. Amen? That's the fix.